So Jesus did a lot of healing in his years of ministry. And when I think about the healing stories of Jesus from the Gospels, I think of like the centurion's child or the Samaritan woman who kept insisting that Jesus heal her daughter, like because even the dogs under the table got the scraps. Or the woman who had the hemorrhage where she touched Jesus and he felt the power going out of him. But I don't often think of this story about the 10 lepers. It's only in the Gospel of Luke, and it's a different kind of a story. Now, I think as modern day Christians, it may be difficult for us to know how to hear these stories about healing. Some of us wonder, were these people literally healed? I mean, was Jesus really going around like this miracle worker who could heal anybody? Or are the stories myths that are meant to make us believe more in who Jesus was? Or were they made whole in some symbolic way, but not necessarily medically healed? The stories bring up a lot of questions for us. Will you pray with me, please? Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable. Let us each hear the lesson that we need for ourselves and our own journey this morning. Amen. So you'll notice in this morning's gospel, Jesus tells the lepers, not that they are made well, but that they should go see the priest. Did you notice that? It's like a subtle distinction. Now, with leprosy, as you know, at that time, it was considered a highly contagious disease, and it was disfiguring, and there was absolutely no cure. So anyone who had leprosy was isolated from family, friends, any kind of social life. So you can see why these 10 were traveling like in a pack together, and they were keeping their distance from Jesus, because they had to keep their distance from anyone that didn't have leprosy. And the priests were the ones who could certify that they were clean and that they could return to everyday life. So on the way to the temple, on the way to get certified, the 10 lepers realized they were no longer lepers. But only one, the Samaritan, the outsider, the foreigner, not from the Hebrew tribes, returns to thank Jesus. So, like Jesus even said, what happened to the other 9? They did not come back to thank me. I've got to assume that the other 9 were just as happy to go on with their lives. They were healed, and it's time to go on with it. But there's another possible explanation for why they didn't turn back. I think it's possible that they did not recognize the connection between Jesus's words and their cure. After all, they said, have mercy on me. He said, go see the priest. Sometime later, we don't know how long, they were cured. And I think there's something interesting about that, because I'll even notice, when Aveline was telling her story, she wasn't sure exactly when her healing occurred. She only knew that it had occurred sometime between the start of school and today. And I think we often notice that we're made well, made whole, healed, if not always cured physically, like while we're doing something else, while we're on the journey. Once we look down and notice, that's not really a problem for me anymore. And it might be hard to pinpoint like the moment that we were made well or how exactly we were healed. And I believe, I think as most of us do, that many factors often contribute to healing. If you've been through cancer treatment or healed from a surgery, there's more to it than a medical intervention. There were the people that called you, the people that texted, the people that came over with a meal. There were people that sent flowers. There were people that were praying for you. There was a community praying for you. You might have had a personal insight while you were going through your illness that helped you to be made well. It wasn't just one thing. And I believe that most of all, it is the love that we experience when we are hurting, when we are wounded, when we are in need of some kind of help, that is what heals us. But you know, there are a lot of explanations for healing out there. I'm sure you've all heard some of them. Recently, I listened to a podcast where a Harvard psychology professor was interviewed. And her whole thesis is that our thoughts are so powerful. She gave examples that go beyond the placebo effect that show that when we think about a given situation and what we think about the situation is an actual force that can lead to a healing, even a remission, or what might be called today a medical miracle. Well, this is not news to me since I grew up with a Christian Science-leaning mother. Now, I know some of you know about Christian Science and probably most of you don't. But I've always had to grapple with the concept that thoughts have some kind of impact on health. And that was a very big part of my childhood. My mom used to say to us repeatedly, there is no sickness in God. So when we were sick, we would be like, Mom, we're sick. And the only answer was, there is no sickness in God. And somehow we got through, 6 of us, to age 18, reasonably healthy. But when I grew up and went to college and had a roommate assigned to me, well, that roommate was a science and a pre-med, a science major and a pre-med. And she had a lot to say about my mom and her point of view. And I realized for the first time, how like when you go off, maybe some of you went to college and had a roommate and just were like, oh, my family was different. It wasn't exactly like everybody else. Well, that was the experience I had, because from her point of view, my mom's perspective was the one that was pretty skewed. And she helped me to see at least, and I know some of you are in the medical profession, at least to see that illness was real and that it needed treatment. Well, that was a big advance, that was news for me. And, it might sound obvious to some, but to some who know about Christian Science, yeah, it could be news. So in my 20s and 30s, as people often do, I took the opposite extreme. Like when you grow up one way and then it's like, now it's all this way. So my new point of view was that everything was scientific. Illness was an unfortunate happening, but it was a random pathogen that you encountered on the subway or on the airplane that made you ill. And naturally, I was quite skeptical about anyone saying that thinking, their mood, or most of all, your attitude had anything to do with whether or not you were going to heal. I found that kind of thinking very disturbing. So when I moved to Chattanooga and started chaplaincy training at Erlanger, I had this kind of like full circle moment where I had to realize, in our training, they were talking about the mind-body connection. And I'm like, oh, I'm really skeptical about this mind-body connection. I don't like it. I don't know if I believe it. Everything is science. But I had to realize, in working with patients in the hospital for 6 years, that thoughts and attitudes do have a place in healing. It's just that thoughts and attitudes are not the whole story. They're not the whole story, but they have a place. And medication is not the whole story, but it also has a place. And I realized this much more balanced approach helped me to understand there is a mind-body connection. It's just not as simple as we sometimes think. And one of the ways that I took this, insight was thinking about, like, when you're in the hospital, if you're comfortable and you think the hospital, in my point of view, if it looks nice or it feels like the people are competent, maybe you'll believe that you're going to get better there. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but if you've been to Erlanger, I don't want to dump on Erlanger, it cannot, It can feel a little bit run down, or at least when I first got there. And my insight was if there could be art on the walls, if there could be comfortable furniture in the emergency room waiting area, maybe that would give you a better feeling and more confidence about being healed. And if it didn't directly impact your healing, because I don't know how it would, and I'm not here to explain that, at least it could make you feel better emotionally, psychologically, while you're waiting to find out how your family member did, or how the surgery turned out, or whether the medication was going to help. So I believe that the environment and the space of healing makes a big difference. Now, after I gave birth to our second daughter, I ended up being hospitalized for a few weeks. I think most of you know this. And what stands out to me from that experience is really, more than anything, the love that I felt was surrounding me while I was in the hospital. I remember one of my brothers asking my sister what my favorite flower was, and then having to special order lilies of the valley to be delivered to Charleston, South Carolina. And that's love. Do you know, that means so much to me. Or my sister being worried that I wouldn't eat, so she created and ordered from a restaurant this incredible sushi dinner. And of course, it all tasted like sandpaper to me because I had thrush and I didn't want to eat it. But the idea that she had gone to all that trouble, that is love. And I remember we had just joined a church, and some of the well-meaning folks brought over this beautiful CD of Christmas music because they thought it was so great. It was piano music. They just thought it was lovely. It was. I listen to it to this day. And it was like the love of these well-meaning church folks that we had just met coming to the hospital to try to do something to help. And this love that people can put towards us, I believe, is what helps us to heal in every situation. And even when we aren't cured, we can recognize God's love underlies all our circumstances. And God's love is there in the effort to cure us or to repair a wound or to heal a broken heart. And I want to say this, God's love is there even if it doesn't succeed. Do you know, I don't think it's really based on success or failure of the cure. The love is there regardless, and it changes things. And it can be there in your family and friends, but it can also be there in complete strangers that show love to you. I believe that is healing. And in the end, our whole lives are just a story about love. Does that make sense to you? There's different things that happen, but in the end, it was about people expressing love and people receiving love. Our lives are a story about finding wholeness in the midst of brokenness, of seeing in the life of Jesus an offering of healing that impacts mind, body, and spirit. So this morning, I wanted to dedicate this service to the concept of healing in all its facets. There is much more to healing than we can understand. But I hope you will take what follows in the service as an offering to you of healing. So during the music of reflection, after we sing Spirit of the Living God, while Nicole plays, I would invite you to go back. There's a small table in the back, and Reverend Greg Carlson will be there to pray with you. And if you'd like to be anointed, he will do so. I will also have some sage if you would like to have sage. So just allow yourself to do what feels right to you, or if you're sitting in your seat, just to be in prayer for all the healing that we each need as individuals, that our community needs, and that our world needs, that we can pray together in this beautiful way. Amen.